How summer shape of
Yeah, so every day's new and fun challenge, but yeah, some sort of challenge.
Jen's mentioned. Sorry to push you out to the side.
Trust me. I gotta go hang out with 45 other people with an hour and a half, so less Is audio on? Audio following the
Yeah, I was worried about you.
Oh. I throw my hat in wood, for sure.
It feels nice to be.
audience.
I understand I have to get this to go.
Oh.
Sorry. Are you getting flashback?
Luna, you look so natural back there.
Good evening. I'd like to call our meeting to order. This is the Board of Education or District 68 meeting of May 19th, 2022. If I could have a roll call, please.
Bell Jordan. Here. Espinoza.
Here.
Joseph. Ruffner.
Here.
Sturban.
Here.
Sullivan. Here. Warshaw. Here.
Thank you. Glad to see a full house here, so we'll get the meeting started. We are all masked as a board as we've had a couple exposures within our ranks. And so we're going to take extra precautions today. We will first start with our hearing. We will conduct a public hearing. I hereby open the public hearing concerning the intent of the Board of Education to sell not to exceed $11,250,000 working cash fund bonds for the purpose of increasing the district's working cash fund. Any board inquiries?
This is the last step before the board can actually approve the sale of the working cash bonds next month. The board must hold a public hearing so that community members can comment or ask questions if they so choose. And the board can also obviously ask questions if they so choose.
We had a chance last month. Any additional questions today?
No.
Right. We'll We now open this hearing to comments from members of the public. Kindly note that public comment on any other issue besides the intent of the Board of Education to sell working cash fund bonds should be held until the appropriate segment of the regular meeting following this hearing. Does anyone wish to comment or have any questions related to the intent of the board to sell not to exceed 11,250,000 working cash fund bonds for the purpose of increasing the district's working cash fund? We had any registered, is that correct? Seeing no, then I hereby close the public hearing concerning the intent of the Board of Education to sell not to exceed 11,250,000 working cash fund bonds for the purpose of increasing the district's working cash fund. We will now open our meeting for public comment. I believe we have one to be read.
We do.
One in person.
Dear members of the Board of Education, it was a disappointment that after Liz Hinziger, French teacher at Niles North and Niles West, and myself, French teacher at Niles North and Niles West from 1996 to 2014, spoke at the April 1 board meeting urging you to reconsider your March 17 vote to eliminate French, that you did not choose to take up this issue. We have since seen the 7th grade enrollment statistics for the past several years that were provided once requested by Dr. Garwood. These figures confirmed our contention that the French enrollment has not been in a steady decline, and we urge you to now look at those statistics and support the continued study of French at Old Orchard. We respectfully suggest that a French class be offered to the 7th grade students who begin their study of French this year so that they can complete the 7th and 8th grade sequence to earn the 1 credit necessary to enter level 2 French at Niles North. We also suggest that Old Orchard continue to offer French to 7th graders in 22-23. If there are not enough students for a class, we suggest that the class be canceled for 22-23 and then offered again the following year, as has happened once in the past. French does not need, to be eliminated because the pandemic has disturbed the normal flow of events. Please look at the statistics, some of which were not available, you'll recall, on March 17th, so that you can be sure to have a clear picture on the French program and can thoughtfully consider our request. Thank you for your service to District 68, its students, parents, and community. Eileen Walford.
And then public comments from the room. We have any registered?
We do. Mrs. McHugh.
Podium. I have to. I don't have prepared comments. This won't be long. For those who don't know me, I'm a longtime resident of the district, a former board member for many years, so it's very different to be on this side of the room. But I really wanted to come tonight to add my voice to the retirement recognition. I know this is coming up in the agenda later. It's always a bittersweet moment when we recognize teachers for retirement. I think for teachers it may be purely sweet, but for us it's always been bittersweet. We're sad to see you go. We appreciate everything you've done. And the last couple of years we didn't really get to do that in person, and I felt the absence of that sorely, so I wanted to come tonight. And then I wanted to particularly recognize my dear friend Marie, who brought a great deal of warmth and grace and love and joy to Highland School. So thank you for that, Marie. And that's all I wanted to say tonight. So, but thank you to all our retirees for many years of great service. Thank you.
I believe that is the end of the public comments, and I want to thank President McHugh for the wonderful segue to our retirement recognition.
Okay, well, into the retirement recognition portion of our agenda. I'll probably be a little more short-winded than normally tonight, as my energy is not quite full force yet. I want to recognize Kelly, Rosanna Marie for your many wonderful years of service to the school district. You will be sorely missed. I wish you the best in retirement, and I hope you come back to visit and keep in touch with the school district afterwards. And Kelly, if you're ever looking for a sub job, we're always in need. So if you ever get a hankering and just feel like you need a little bit more, please come on back. And likewise, Marie and Roseanne, we also need subs in the secretarial ranks and our TA ranks as well. So you are more than welcome. We'd love to see you back. at this time, I'm going to turn it over to your principals so that they can tell us a little bit about your years of service in District 68.
Dr. Brown.
Dr. Bradley will be first.
Okay, I did make notes because this is an emotional goodbye, and I'm going to take my mask off too. But I'd like to ask Roseanne to come up first. This is Roseanne Zabrin. She was hired in November of 1999, working as a playground supervisor, and then became a TA in 2001 school year. And so she's been with us for 22 years. And I know I speak on behalf of all of the staff at Highland in saying that it is a true joy to work with Roseanne every day. Roseanne's someone who personifies humility and gratitude. She accepts everyone exactly as they are. She's completely devoted to her reading intervention students, taking pride in every one of their accomplishments. I recently learned, actually through her resignation letter, that reading intervention has been her favorite assignment in all her years at Highland. Roseanne is so flexible and willing to do whatever is needed on any given day. She's done a lot of substitute teaching these past few years, and although she was scared, she even took on leading classrooms remotely without missing a beat. Nearly every time she subs in a classroom, she comes into the office at the end of the day and says, "I had such a good time with that class today." We loaned her to the ECC for some months during the pandemic, and when she came back, she raved so much about her experiences there. I knew they wanted to have her permanently, so I brought it up with her, and thankfully she was quick to say, "Oh, no, thank you." I'm happiest at Highland. Roseanne's good nature and artistic talents will be missed on a daily basis at Highland School, but we wish her lots of relaxation and good times in her retirement. Congratulations, Roseanne. And now Marie Rawls. Marie was hired in September of 2001 as a TA. She became a health clerk at Highland in 2014 and secretary in 2015. And while I'm absolutely sure she was a terrific TA, we've been so fortunate to have had Marie as Highland School's secretary. One could not ask for a better first face to see when coming to the school, whether for the first time or the 1000th time. Marie will be missed by staff, students, and families. She's thoughtful and empathetic, always finding the best in each person she encounters, and intuitively seeing and fulfilling needs for everyone. Marie has a way of making everyone feel as if their problem is the most important thing right now, and it is her pleasure to make things right for you. Marie calls all of the staff members and students Sweetie or Sweetie Pie, and somehow, even though she calls everyone that, you just know you're special when she says it to you. Although I realized at lunch today she doesn't call me that. Or her husband. Marie insists on good manners from the children when they come into the office, teaching them the importance of greeting others before asking for what they need, and reminding them to say please and thank you. Marie clearly finds joy in her work. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that working with Marie is also a lot of fun. We laugh a lot in our office. Marie will be missed by Highland multiple times each day. It's been a true honor to work closely with her, and she's leaving big shoes to fill. But we know the lure of being near young grandchildren is strong, and we wish her all the best in the next phase of her life in Minnesota.
Thank you so much.
So I have the honor to recognize Kelly Skokie. Come on up. So it is my pleasure to honor Kelly this evening. Kelly always puts her students first. She's kind and patient, and she advocates for them to ensure they receive the very best. When you walk into her classroom, you'll find a classroom that's truly set up for success. She takes the time to get to know her students, not only academically, but also who they are as young people. In particular this year, I feel like you've served as a counselor for many of your students. She's an integral teammate and dedicated team leader. Staff go to her all the time for advice and support, and she truly cares about her teammates, both personally and professionally. I know that you and I have worked so well together over the past 3 years, and these past 3 years have been bumpy years. Kelly has rolled with the punches. Talk about ending your career in a pandemic, but you would never know it with Kelly. I would say she's the anchor in our building. And you would never see the stress, maybe her family did at home during the pandemic, but at school she was truly our anchor through these last 3 years and helped me as a new principal in her building. You will truly be missed at Stenson, and we thank you for your 33 years of service in District 68. You've left so many positive marks on students and staff lives, and we just will really miss you, and I wish you the best.
Show our appreciation from the board. Thank you all so much for your years of service. And thank you all for your families and friends for coming out and supporting you. And we will not take it personally if you excuse yourself.
Thank you guys very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And we'll move along to our superintendent.
Okay, so our first report tonight is on our McKinney-Vento grant and our newcomer/life student support program. I will leave it to our presenter to explain what the life means. So,
I will kick it off. We recently received a McKinney-Vento grant, and we've also recently had an influx of students from other countries immigrating here. So we thought that this was an opportune time to talk with you about the supports that we have in place for these students. So just to make sure you understand McKinney-Vento and all that entails around that, our McKinney-Vento supports come from the Homeless Education Assistance Act. That's been around for quite a while, and really it just mandates that we provide supports to students who don't have a fixed, regular, or adequate nighttime residence. And we put pieces into place to make sure that there is no barrier to those students being able to attend school. Things such as not having a birth certificate readily handy, which is a piece of registration. We don't keep our students out of school because of that. They just come right on in. Along with many other components to that act. We did receive a $16,179 that will need to be spent pretty quickly. We just received word of the grant a couple of months ago. And so this presentation will talk with you a little bit about what we're going to do with that, with those funds. And the other side of tonight's presentation is around our newcomer or our SLIFE students. Newcomers are new to the United States and enrolling into our schools for the very first time. They typically have limited English proficiency, while our SLIFE students are students that have limited literacy in their home language, gaps in their content knowledge. They have limited or interrupted formal education wherever they have come from. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Marler for a couple of slides, and then Deanna Juarez.
So we have in total 28 students who are qualifying for the McKinney-Vento supports. And of those 28 students, we have 20 students who qualify as newcomers. We had an influx, a deluge, if you will, April 4th to April 8th, where we received 20 students en masse. And you can see the diversity there. Countries included Afghanistan, Iraq, Pakistan, Russia, and Syria. And languages among those 20 students included Arabic, Assyrian, Dari, Pashto, Russian, and Urdu. And Dari and Pashto are relatively new languages for our district, but we were anticipating that arrival because those are languages used in Afghanistan. So part of our plan for support is to make sure that Deanna, as a community and parent liaison and engagement coordinator, has supports in place. And that we also have academic and linguistic supports in place for our newcomer students, as well as the parents of newcomers. And so some key aspects of that would be our ESL resource teachers and our ESL classroom teachers. We've increased the number of those from back in 2017, we had 9, now we have 61. So we're quite well endowed in terms of our ESL teachers, and we've been augmenting our classroom libraries and making sure that materials are established and in place to support the children.
In anticipation of the arrival of students from Afghanistan, we sort of knew it was coming but didn't know exactly when. So we knew enough to prepare a compilation of resources. So that includes panel discussions, fact sheets that are coming from different organizations that work as refugee resettlement agencies, and just different cultural explanations, the languages, the roles of women and men, education, religion, everything having to do with Afghanistan, sort of in preparation of the influx of students. So we knew how to best serve families. We knew what would be appropriate. We were able to share that with teachers so that they knew what was sort of happening in their classrooms and how to best approach the influx of the new students that came relatively late in the school year. So we knew that it would be kind of a shakeup and wanted to be as prepared as possible. We didn't plan for it to all happen in 1 week, but it did, and we were at least somewhat prepared for that. And the additional layers of support that are funded by this McKinney-Vento grant include school supplies and at-home supplies. So when a student registered, as quickly as I could, I reached out to the family, got backpacks together full of the supplies. We knew that it's automatic enrollment with McKinney-Vento, so we wanted to make sure when they did go into the classrooms, they were at least prepared with supplies and could feel that they were really jumping in as part of the classroom. Clothing is also provided, so McKinney-Vento allows for 1 full outfit per student. I have been working to streamline the process so that we can have the families create an Amazon wish list, which is a little bit easier than maybe trying to communicate, likes and dislikes of style and clothes, and just giving them the option of going to Amazon, picking an outfit per child that they like, sharing the wish list with me, and then being able to use that as a way to use the funds through the district a little more easily and a little more streamlined, where the kids get clothes that they like and that they want to wear. Also the newcomer summer school. So this year we decided to try
We have a slide for that coming up.
Okay, newcomer summer school. So we are using some of those funds to provide a summer program for newcomer students. So students who are new to the country will have 3 weeks, the same time as Summer Blast. And they will work on basic, and Dr. Marta will speak to that a little more, but we are using the funds to provide teachers, ESL teachers for that program, as well as the supplies that will be used in the classroom and supplies for students to have at home. Importantly, something like a dual language dictionary, something where students can have it, take it home. It can be a resource for the family. Those are the kinds of things we're looking to use this money for. And parent education sessions. So McKinney-Vento is not only for the students, but it also allows us as a district to serve the whole family, which we know as part of our strategic plan is important to us. So it's not just students in the classroom, but we are able to also help parents so that they're in a situation to better help their students at home. For us, that will look like parent education sessions. Being so new to the country and coming so late in the year, there's a lot that parents are just not maybe not ready for, not used to, not accustomed to when it comes to the educational system. So those sessions will focus on, we'll speak to that a little more later too, they'll focus on real practical survival-based language, understanding the big major points of a district, kind of an education system 101 for parents. Though we're starting it as part of this newcomer summer school, I do expect to continue that and make that a year-round program in partnership with the EL Parent Center.
So those of you that were here back when we had our EL learning team, you may remember that one of our recommendations that came out of that learning team was to provide some sort of newcomer programming option. So that was in 2017 when we made that board presentation, and then we moved as our first priority to the EL program design. And then we were, just getting going with the EL program design and COVID hit. And so we weren't able to implement newcomer programming actions in the midst of COVID. But this gives you a bit of an overview of our intention to providing services and that soften the landing for children and their parents, both during the summertime, but also during the school year. So you can see we're kind of focusing on orientation to U.S. schools, and that is going to happen a lot through our work with Diana and with the EL Parent Center. Orientation to U.S. culture. So we're working with social workers to make sure they understand kind of the cultural background, expectations, likely experiences that our students have had and our parents. We want to focus through newcomer programming on relationship building and helping both children and their families feel comfortable in their new community, feel comfortable in their new school, and feel as though they are beginning new relationships with their teachers and their classmates. And then we also want to be mindful of their need for some explicit instruction in survival English, right? Because teachers, especially when children are coming in April, right, things have been moving along at a clip. And so we're mindful of what that feels like and the challenge that presents to then have new students enter almost at the end of the year in a completely different place than perhaps the rest of the class. And so we are able to now provide an ESL specialist who will help with our implementation of this going forward next school year. And so as the number of ESL teachers increase at each building, the need for an ESL resource teacher declined. And so that's where this position is coming from. So the summer school program will give us kind of an opportunity to experiment and to plan and to pilot some of these ideas. All our newcomer students are invited, and by definition, those would be kids who've entered since January up until the last day of school. And we're going to offer the summer school program for our newcomer students in the afternoons, separate from the summer blast program, which is in the mornings. So it'll be 2.5 hours, 12 days, so a total of 30 hours together, where again, the focus is on building oracy, survival English, concrete nouns, action verbs, adjectives, adverbs, numbers, colors, months of the year, in units that are built thematically around themes such as family life, recreation, sports and leisure, community, schools, food, and then built within that are shared experiences, because we want to grow their cultural background or tap into their existing experiential background. So we plan to have area field trips, maybe a field trip to the Jewel to understand a large supermarket, a field trip to the Skokie Public Library, make sure parents know of this great resource and are able to get a library card. 4 teachers will participate in this summer school, and we think it will lay a good groundwork for our work next school year.
And to speak a little bit more about the parent education sessions, it so far is not as structured as the curriculum for the students, but we know that we will focus on introduction of the fundamentals of public education and what we expect here in Skokie School District 68. Simple things that might be simple to us, like the difference between an elementary school and a junior high, and different buildings, different teachers, schedules, things that we might take for granted as a parent knowing. We want to make sure that those bases are covered. The school calendar, different days that we have off, when school starts, winter break, spring break, these all might be kind of new ideas to these families. And access to school information. So making sure parents understand that their children will get iPads, how to find information from the district, who to contact at their respective schools, some real fundamentals there. An introduction to the EL Parent Center we think is important. So naturally, ESL classes might be of interest to some of these families, but also a chance to socialize with other families who might be new to the country, who might speak some of the same language, or at least understand that being bicultural and raising children in a new environment can be challenging. A chance to connect with other people. Facilitate social connections, yeah, so through the ELL Parent Center, but even through this program itself, having the parents meet other parents who are new to the country. We think that's a really important and valuable aspect to it. The parents are very excited for their children to get school, but there's also that added layer of having the parents kind of feel welcome and accepted and have an opportunity to talk to us and tell us what they're interested in and what they'd like to know. Some of the activities, like Dr. Marler mentioned, field trips to the grocery store, some of these practical survival-based activities are important, but we want to make sure that we are asking the families what they would like to know and what questions they have. I think about one time when I was working at the EL Parent Center, we took parents on a trip to Oakton Community College. We wanted them to see the language lab, which is a place where they could also learn English and have different resources. And when we came back to the center and debriefed, I asked, what was your favorite part? What did you find interesting? And one parent was just so giddy and excited about having ridden the school bus. Her kids got on this bus every day, and she was so emphatic and excited that she got to ride and see what that felt like too. And it's moments like that that really kind of grounded me, and that it's not always what I think parents want or what parents need. We really have to take a step back and ask them, what would you like to know? And then have them kind of guide the rest of the curriculum, whether it's these sessions and then in the future sessions that come out of it. So we're very excited for it. The parents have been extremely excited, eager, appreciative of having a program for their students, and we think they'll appreciate the program for them as well. Some of the money will be used on interpreters because there's low English proficiency among the parents as well. We want to make sure that we are reaching them in a language that they're comfortable in, having materials translated so they can have them at home. We know that some of the funds will be used for that too. Any questions?
I'm curious where the summer school is taking place.
Wisconsin.
Right. Field trips.
Yeah, so we have offered transportation, of course, to all of the families that have requested bus service, and most of them have.
I have a quick question. First of all, thank you very much for the presentation. I noticed that the summer school program will be 12 or so half days in the month of July. Do you have any sense, I know that the parent education sessions are still taking shape, but do you have any sense of how many you're looking for and how those will be organized in comparison to the students' summer school?
So far, it's looking more like maybe once a week if we can get parents together. It's really going to depend on the availability of the parents and maybe their comfort level coming to the school, but we did brainstorm that maybe that first day having everybody come as one big group so that nobody feels too intimidated or too nervous about being maybe at Stenson, which might be a new school to them, or for the parents to feel sort of that they're part of this, that it's like a family program that we're providing over the summer. So thinking that maybe we can invite parents that first day and then see if it works to do it every Monday that the program is running. That's still a little loose. We wanted to make sure we nailed on the students, that we knew how many teachers to hire, and the parent portion is sort of a supplement to the student program. But from what I can guess is maybe 3 sessions with parents, and then if they're interested, just continuing from there.
And we're trying to connect the curriculum that's being offered to the students to those parent events to the extent that we can, because we're also mindful that we want to foster conversation between parents and children about what happened in school. So for example, in the thematic unit around community, that would be a nice place to put the visit to the library. Whereas the field trip to Jewel would fit in nicely in the food unit. So we're trying to make sure that we're connected in the offerings.
With apologies, that first of all, I wanted to thank you for the sensitivity with which you've been really trying to think about all this with a very wide net. And the cultural anthropologist in me has a lot of questions, but they're just clarifying questions. They're not poking holes questions. One was a question about whether or not any aspect of this is going to be able to help families. Some of these families, if they've had a refugee experience, might likely need to be connected with some sort of mental health supports or resources, especially like that whole idea of not being able to go back home, and that can have a lot of aspects attached to it. So that was my first question, was if there's been any conversations with entities in the community about how to hook them into those supports if they'd like them.
Yes, there has been some discussion. For example, the Women's Muslim Resource Center, Devon, I've worked recently very closely with the director there, and they have served as a resettlement agency recently. So we've been connected, and she has some volunteers that she said would be happy to participate in the program. And we didn't speak directly about every issue they might tackle, but just the idea that refugees have a specific sort of need, and the mental health situation looks different than it might in other populations. So part of the parent session will include a connection to the community that way. So outside of just the maybe practical quotidian kind of activities, also bringing in the resources that families will use. So that's through the parent center, but also through specific agencies, Refugee One, the Muslim Women's Resource Center, and other organizations that will speak to the needs that we know refugee families have.
Fantastic. I have one more question and then a comment. Is there plans for having a focus group or feedback mechanism to talk to the families and students about their experiences? Because it's something that we're going to plan on taking forward, and it's kind of a pilot. So I was thinking one of the things that would be really interesting, again, meeting people, like the school bus was the most exciting part, to sort of find out like what were the things that really worked for people, what were the things that they didn't necessarily connect with, and sort of use that to be able to inform what you're doing afterwards.
I'm sorry, are you asking within
Is
the program?
is there a plan for some sort of focus group at the end with the participants in the program, both students and the families, to be able to discuss what their evaluation of the program was? What were the things they felt were continued to be gaps or that they didn't quite understand? What were the things that they really found useful? Like just to give us feedback so that it can build on those particular suggestions moving forward, and the strengths and the places that could be built.
I think in general, we're always mindful of how parents receive what's offered. And as Deanna said, it's more than that. We want to ask parents in advance, what do you want? So that we're not, it's not a one-way, it's a mutual. We also had conversations, Deanna and I, this hasn't come to fruition yet, but we also talked about how our parents could contribute to our own growth and capacity as a staff. And we talked about how we might be able to, after the dust settles for many of these families, kind of organize some panel discussions where we have parents speak to us as educators about their unique experiences in anecdotal form to give us, the greater us, the all of us, a better understanding of what their experiences have been. And so that's integral to our conversations. How that actually plans out, whether that's summer school or next year, we haven't decided, but it's really important, I think, to both of us that we consider that.
And it's not necessarily as easy as maybe a survey that parents are happy to answer. It's a new idea for parents to have a voice in the school, to be asked their opinions, and to say, you will help guide us in our offering and services to you. So I think it's something that's we're gonna work on now, but it's gonna be a continued effort, I think.
Great, and I just was thinking about this in terms of field trips. One of the things that a lot of the newcomer families that I've encountered have said, and also when I've had people from, I've had students come to visit from Tanzania, and their favorite place to go is actually Walmart because it's a lot cheaper, and Jewel is very expensive. And so I was thinking having that experience of a big supermarket might be great, but it might also be really useful to try like showing some of the, I was thinking of like the village market that has a lot more ethnic foods, or that we have a lot of ethnic food stores that are in Skokie or nearby, that may also be really nice for folks to know about, so they can find the kinds of things that they're wanting to at a price that might not actually sink them. So that was my only comment about the field trips, is like, I think it's good to have that exposure, but then for them to realize that there's lots of these other kinds of things around that they might find a little bit more reachable.
Thank you. Yeah, and the Jewel was even maybe a placeholder name. I partnered with H Mart in Niles, and they give an amazing presentation and tour of their store to parents that are EL parents, that are English learners, really sensitive to that, and such, I mean, it might be a little overwhelming, H Mart, but keeping that in mind. Thank you. To that point, yeah, we wanna serve them the best we can through that.
Thank you.
I just have an observation after hearing the wonderful presentation tonight. It reminds me of the wisdom of the board in creating these two positions. Back when I started, we did not have an EL director, we did not have a family services engagement coordinator. In hearing about the work that they've done together to create supports for our kids, it makes me very proud to be superintendent in this district, and very proud of the board that saw the need and approved the funds to be able to create these positions. I think it's brought great resources and to what our teachers and our staff is able to do to support kids. So thank you very much, ladies. Thank you very much, board.
Is there another question from Jeff?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I was waiting. First, I kind of piggybacking on what you just said, Jim, I just wanted to thank you not just for the presentation, but for the work that you're doing. The fact that this is so ingrained into the culture of the school district and the community is just fantastic. It's a big part of what drew my family here. And to see the presentation, it's wonderful. I want to thank you. Following up on one of the questions Noelle had about community linkages, I wasn't sure if you have any formal process yet for how to make sure you're able to share information between the school district and the community organizations, especially with the level of transience that families often have, even when they first come to a community. And if there are so many areas of confidentiality and red tape that if you don't address those at the front end, it can be very hard to do later. And I just didn't know if that's baked in yet to the process or something that you'd consider part of it.
Actually, it's already occurred in one of our buildings where the parents do not want any photographs taken, any video, and so we're already aware of that as an issue. But yes, we will keep that in mind.
Oh, good. I mean, I was thinking, I'm glad to know that as well, but more information often gets siloed between, you know, a Refugee One organization and a school system and a mental health organization, where you only have a relatively small piece of what the family is going through, where these other organizations have a great deal more. And if you're able to work out a system with releases of information at the front end that let you communicate with each other, you often learn a lot more because of what's been shared with those other organizations.
That is something I'm actively working on. I do partner closely with Refugee One when we have a shared family that we're both trying to serve, not only to get all the information, but to know what resources and services are already being provided so that there's not redundancy there. The needs are great, so making sure if they've covered that, then I'm gonna come in and cover the rest. So it's less structure just because of the different processes that each organization has, but that is sort of at the forefront is how are we gonna get all the information we need to best serve the family. So that is something that, quite honestly, it's just something I kind of have to work on case by case, and day to day. There's no formal or official process in place with many of the organizations yet.
Got it. And then just a broader question, magic wand. If you could develop more resources either within the school district or the community, is there something that you see as a need that it would be great if we had more to help these families? And this isn't a one-time question, if that's something that you'd like.
What comes to my mind first is Dari and Pashto are very difficult languages to have with interpreters and get community resources that way. If I'm going to Heartland Health Centers for flyers about their health services, Dari and Pashto are not on the wall. So that's what comes to mind as one of the bigger challenges specifically with this influx of refugees coming from Afghanistan. So, and I don't know if that's even a money question or if that's just the human capital question of where can we find the help that we need there. So that's what first comes to mind. But if I had $1 million, there's a lot of programming I could come up with. But when I think about the current challenges, I think that language barrier would be at the top.
Fortunately, we're not a resource-poor school district, so as we identify supports that we believe are going to help our families, I don't think we'll have a problem being able to provide those, and if any of those supports are of a sizable financial nature, we'll be talking to you about them.
But thank you again. I appreciate it.
I also just want to add one more comment. I'm reminded next week we're getting a visit from Boston College. For the last 3.5 years, we participated in a research study with them. We were one of about a dozen school districts identified across the country as being lighthouses for how we serve our immigrant population. I think the week before the pandemic hit, back in March of 2019, we were actually out at Boston College on a retreat, and next week they are coming out to follow up and conduct interviews to conclude their study. They'll be interviewing Barb, Deanna, and a number of us, and a number of our teachers who serve Yale students as well. It's been a very rewarding experience. Unfortunately, we kind of had to go the Zoom route for the last couple of years, but I was very proud of the school district for being recognized and chosen for a study like that. I mean, we're talking a dozen school districts across the country. I believe we're the smallest one. I mean, there's some very large districts in Washington State, Texas, Maine, all over the country. They're part of that. So, all right. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Okay, next I'd like to just provide a little bit of an overview about our strategic plan process. It's at the same time that it feels kind of amazing that we're already talking about this. It's 5 years ago. On the one hand, it feels like a real short time ago. On the other hand, it feels like a world away. Our world was a very different place 5 years ago. So here we are. I provided a little bit of an overview in my memo, and we talked about this at the last month. We agreed to do a 3-year strategic plan this time around instead of a 5-year plan, in part because we thought that we could focus a little bit more on COVID learning recovery on a shorter plan, as well as it provides a good opportunity for a new superintendent to come in and be part of that next strategic plan, rather than have to start and then wait several years. They actually, the plan after this 3-year plan, they would actually be in the district for a year at that time and be able to participate, have some contact and relationships built with board members and teachers and community members. So we all agreed that that was a good idea to do a 3-year plan this time around, so that the new superintendent, a couple of years from now, will be able to come in and be part of that plan creation. So I've met with Jeff Cohn, the gentleman who facilitated our strategic plan 5 years ago. He's very excited to be coming back. He's a Northwestern graduate and does this for a living. Very good at it. And we've sort of fleshed out a timeline and a process here. For that strategic plan focus group, that will be a cross-functional group. It'll include board members, members of the administrative team, parents. Last time we had Old Orchard students participate, and that was a very powerful experience for them as well as for all of us. We'll have licensed staff, classified staff, and then we'll invite some community members at large as well in that process. For a timeline, we have proposed starting in the beginning of September that we would do teacher, parent, and student surveys, and we'll be fleshing out what those survey questions are. I'll solicit some ideas if there's particular things of interest that board members have to be a part of that survey. We'll talk more about that in coming meetings. That survey will be last time around, we manually translated the survey in our top 6 or 7 languages. And what we found is very few people actually took the survey in the language other than English. This time around, I think we've got a leg up. We have our translation system built, so if anybody needs to access the surveys in another language, it should be much easier to do this time around, and in more languages than just our top 6 languages. After the survey is closed, we'll compile that data. We have a tentative date set to do the strategic plan focus group on a Saturday, October 15th. It would be an 8:30 to 3:30 day with a lunch included. Again, Jeff will be our facilitator, and he will start out with a review of where the district's at, sort of a state of the district. And then Jeff will lead us through a SWOT analysis, which is analyzing our strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And from there, we'll engage in discussion around what some of our overarching goal areas should be, as well as what some of the specific activities might need to fit underneath those goals. After that day, we'll take all that information and feedback and come up with a draft strategic plan that we will then share with the board. We'll also share it with everybody who's on the strategic plan team for additional feedback to make sure it captures the spirit of what we talked about on our strategic plan retreat day. We'll make modifications and tweaks to that. The admin team will essentially flesh it out in further detail and fill in the gaps with a lot of the activities that we think support the goals that we outlined. Last time around, we did engage in vision and mission and sort of those large goal areas. I don't sense that we really need to modify our vision and mission, although if there's something that changes an outcome of that day, we can certainly go back and make some tweaks to that. But I think our vision and mission are very solid. I think they really describe who we aspire to be in District 68 as a school district. So I don't anticipate great changes with the vision and mission. It'll probably be more focused on providing the support for students and families and our staff to be able to provide support for students and families. I anticipate that at our January 2023 board meeting that we would approve that new plan, and then that would last for approximately 3 years, and then we would engage in the creation of a new plan, potentially and probably a 5-year plan at that point, depending on what you guys would like to do. Any questions? Holding the date on the calendar. All right. Oh,
do we know what the diversity of the participation was in those feedback surveys or in the focus group on the previous survey that was done for the strategic plan?
So when we put the survey out, I could probably go back and try to figure out that. It's 5 years ago, so I don't really remember exactly what the demographics of survey participants were. We purposefully structured inviting parents and staff members in to create sort of a broad swath of representation so that we represented our different groups of parents by race, ethnicity, religion, background experiences, etc. So we absolutely made efforts to create a focus group that really represented the entire district. And we'll obviously do the exact same thing this time. Any questions? Okay, move on to your final report. Thank you very much. As far as just additional comments, as you're aware, the COVID cases have been increasing in the community. After we came back from spring break, we had a week where we got up to about 50 cases of kids and staff again. As of this evening, I looked before the meeting, and I think we have about 17 students who are currently out with COVID, and I believe 3 or 4 different staff members. It's actually gone down in the last week or so. We still do have testing going on. Tomorrow, I believe we had testing today, so we obviously don't have those results back yet. And I believe, Ryan, next week is the last week that we will have shield testing. Next week is the last full week of school, and then after that, we come back for another day. Do I have that right? No, 2 more weeks. 2 more weeks. Yeah.
Next week is the last full week of school.
Yes. Okay. As far as the future of shield testing, we don't know what the future is going to bring with COVID in terms of next year. We do know that there has not been a reapproval of federal funding for COVID, which I believe is where a lot of the dollars come from that have funded our shield testing for this year. As messy as it's been, it's also been very helpful for us in order to manage cases and identify students and staff members that need to quarantine. But at this point, I can't tell you whether we'll be doing shield testing next year or not. It probably will depend upon funding. So stay tuned for more COVID updates in the future.
Thank you. We now move on to our meeting and acceptance of minutes. I call for a motion to approve the minutes from the April 21st, 2022 Board of Education regular meeting.
So moved.
Second.
Espinoza.
Yes.
Ruffner.
Yes.
Sturban.
Yes.
Sullivan.
Yes.
Warshaw.
Yes.
Beljordan.
Yes.
Thank you. The consent agenda is our next item of business. Does any member wish to remove any item for separate consideration? No, I call for a motion to approve the consent agenda, which includes the personnel report authorizing the hire of administrative staff, the hire, change of status, leave of absence, resignation, and retirement of licensed staff, the hire and resignation of classified staff, financial reports, pay orders and expenditures, second reading of policies 650, 660, 7150, 7190, 7200, 7210, 7250, 730, 7310, 7340, and 870, and the destruction of the closed session audio from the November 19th, 2020 meeting.
So moved.
Second.
Before the board takes a vote on approving the consent agenda, I would like to point out that John Stigler is in our audience here. John, if you could stand for a brief moment here so we can make sure everybody knows who you are. John is set to be approved this evening as our new student services coordinator, assisting Sharon, who is with us as well this evening, our new director. We're really excited to bring John on board. He's got good experiences as a student services coordinator and as an assistant principal in Evanston 65, and we're just delighted to welcome him on board here. So, John,
Thank you.
welcome to District 16.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Very excited to be here.
Pleased to have you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Ruffner.
Yes.
Sturban.
Yes.
Sullivan.
Yes.
Warshaw.
Yes.
Beljordan.
Yes.
Espinoza.
Yes.
Thank you.
We now move on to our reports and discussion items. I believe we have a brief NTDSE report from Espinoza.
So unfortunately, I don't have a report from the meeting. I was unable to attend due to a conflict, but I do have a friend of NCDSE to share super quick. It's Mark Jenkins from James Denson School. Dear Mr. Jenkins, Niles Township District for Special Education truly appreciates those who enhance the lives of our students. Although many people have had an impact on one or more of our students, you've truly made a difference. NTDSE has a recognition program called Friend of NTDSE. We feel it's very important to recognize others who have gone above and beyond to provide an NTDSE student, staff member, or classroom with an exceptional experience. You have been nominated by Ms. Elizabeth Holbrook as one of the exceptional people to be recognized as a friend of NTDSE. Ms. Holbrook stated the following in her nomination. It is with great pleasure that we nominate Mr. Mark Jenkins for consideration for the Friend of NTDSE in recognition of his outstanding companionship to not only our students at NTDSE, but all students and faculty. Mr. Jenkins is a physical education teacher at James Denson Elementary School. Mr. Jenkins is always encouraging, positive, and inclusive. It is these qualities that make him so important to our school at NTDSE. Last year was Jane Stenson's first year hosting a satellite classroom. Mr. Jenkins jumped in full force. He asked questions to learn more about them. He found natural opportunities throughout the day to build relationships, trust, and camaraderie with our students. Not only does he accept our students into his class, but he truly fosters peer relationships. He makes sure that all peers include our students in groups, encourage them, and model how to complete activities. Our students are gaining genuine friendships because of Mr. Jenkins. Mr. Jenkins takes pride in teaching our students the expectations for PE. He holds them to a high standard to complete activities like all of the other students in his general education class. If a student is having a difficult time with an activity, he is quick to brainstorm a modification so that the student can participate. He makes sure that no students are left behind or left out. Mr. Jenkins goes the extra mile for each of our students. He was eager to help one of our students who was struggling and agreed to be his check-in, check-out adult. This is a big responsibility to take on. He goes over his schedule every day, encouraging him to make good decisions. At the end of every day, he praises all of the good efforts the student has made throughout his day. When this student has had an excellent day, he writes him a certificate. This student is so motivated to earn a certificate from Mr. J. This student is always so excited to talk to him and tell him about his day. When Mr. Jenkins noticed the two students were completing class activities independently and without paraprofessional support, he went out of his way to send me an email to ask if he could take over the responsibility for those students. He was excited to take these students under his wing and teach them all of the PE skills. Whenever Mr. Jenkins sees our students in the hallway, he greets them with a big hello. He is always excited to see our students and ask how they are doing. Mr. Jenkins builds each student's confidence by providing them with positive reinforcement. He never forgets to celebrate the small victories. Mr. Jenkins has made Jane Stenson a warm and welcoming environment for our kids to thrive. He has been a great friend to all of our students and staff. Thank you, Mr. Jenkins. We love you.
Wonderful, thanks. As a parent of students, two students who loved Mr. J. I should mention that. Wonderful. We move on to our Edward report. Jeff, good luck following that.
Yeah, I just want to make a request that we switch. I can't compete with that, and mine's really short. There was no meeting this month. The bills that I discussed when we last had a board meeting, almost all of those have been signed into law. Lots of those are intended to address staffing shortages. There's another meeting in June. That's it.
Thank you very much.
And Jeff, I know you had brought up that they had a change in their funding structure or how much they would charge districts to be members. Mr. Berry and I had a little bit of discussion about how that impacted the school district. And Ryan, if you were to refresh my memory, I believe it was a pretty small amount of increase for our school district.
$250 for the district for the year.
Thank you. On to our next item, school crossing guards in the village.
Yep, so our next item, we've had some discussion about before. Earlier in the school year, back in August, we met with Chief Baker, who's in our audience tonight, and John Lockerbie, our village manager, and they informed the Skokie superintendent at the time about their desire to outsource our crossing guards. You know, previously, they, or still to this day, they do the hiring of crossing guards, training, supervising, etc. And for us, there's been a cost share of about a 50-50 split. The way it's worked in the past is they cover the first crossing guard for each school, and then any additional crossing guards after that, the district pays for. So in our case, we've had 8 crossing guards for a number of years, so it was about a 50-50 cost split to be able to fund our crossing guards. 2 of our crossing guards are adjacent to schools, over at Jane Stenson and in front of Old Orchard Junior High. The other 6 were out in the community, a little bit further away from our schools. We have enjoyed that partnership with the village in managing and in funding those positions. But they informed us that they did not feel like they could continue funding the crossing guards, that they had some other financial priorities that they wanted to take care of. I believe body cams for police officers and a couple of other items. So they have told us that they won't pay for crossing guards going forward. We are okay with the outsourcing. They put out a bid. Andy Frayne has responded. They then would, hire, train, and supervise crossing guards. For us, the hourly rate for the crossing guards is about the same, but then we would have to be absorbing the additional, the cost that the village had previously paid for, as well as an approximate $10,000 a year management fee that goes to Andy Frayne. They would create a position that would supervise the program for the Skokie school districts. In discussions that we've had before, both individually and here at the board, I've heard you all want to have some more discussion about this because you likewise value the partnership financially and philosophically as well. We did, hearing what the police, what the chief's concerns were, and the village manager's concerns. One, it takes a lot of time and effort to hire, train, and manage the crossing guards. There's the expense portion. And when they were short on crossing guards, sometimes they would have to deploy police officers to man these crossings. So one step that we took back in November is Ryan, myself, and a handful of other administrators, we went and sat before and after school for an hour or for a week at each one of the crossings to see how many kids are crossing at these crossings. We didn't bother doing that in front of Jane Stenson or Old Orchard because we know those are heavily trafficked crossings, before and after school. So we focused in on these other 6 crossings. And what we found is there was a police officer who was having to man one. And then we found 2 crossings that in a week nobody crossed before school or after school, not even once. So we felt very comfortable in offering to help the situation by saying we don't need these 2 crossing guards. Let's eliminate those positions immediately, and that way one of those 2 crossing guards could go and free up the police officer, which we understood that was an important need that they had as well. So we reduced cost by eliminating 2 and hopefully got the police officer back on the street in the meantime. In talking to John Lockerbie, the village manager, he has reached an agreement with Evanston, because apparently they provide a couple crossing guards for Evanston for a portion of Skokie that attends Evanston 65 schools. And they've come up with an agreement that I believe is 50, they're going to go 50-50 the first year. Next year, I think it's 50-40, or I'm sorry, 60-40, then 70-30. Am I getting that right?
It's, if you don't mind, it's 50% of their increase the first year, then 40%, then 30.
Okay. Yeah, and
That's of the increase, not the total cost.
Okay, just the, okay. So that's, I've had long conversations with John Lockerbie yesterday and some additional conversation today. He wanted to make sure that I knew that, or that I shared that information with all of you. But at this point, I'm not sure where the board is in terms of how you would like to proceed in terms of that funding. We did survey a great deal of school districts in the Chicagoland area through the IASBO, it's the Illinois Association of School Business Officials. They have a survey service where they can put out a question to all the business managers and all these school districts. And what we found is the majority of villages pay the full cost. A smaller number have a cost-sharing arrangement with school districts. And then there's a smaller handful where the cost is entirely borne by the school district. So at this point, I would like to engage in some discussion with all of you to see what would you like to do in this situation?
Can I ask a quick question?
Yes.
Where are all the other Skokie districts officially landing now that, according to the document, Lockerbie says we're not negotiating about we're not going to contribute after next year. So where are the other districts landing?
So they're in the same process that we are, and as far as I know, nobody else has reached an agreement with the village and with the police department about how this goes. We're trying to approach this in a collective fashion, which I know is a frustration for the village as well, because they have 6 different entities to negotiate with, which I understand makes it a little bit more difficult. From what I understand from the superintendents and what they're telling me about how their boards are feeling, they're feeling similarly that they do not feel it's right to, for the village and for the police department to shift the cost 100%. They feel like it's a mutual responsibility to provide for the public safety of our students, off school grounds especially, at some of these crossings. I don't know where I don't know where we'll finally land. Part of it is getting some direction from you, so then superintendents can get back together and see where we are. I know John Lockerbie is very interested in negotiating some sort of compromise. At the end of the day, all the compromises that he's offered do eventually take them out of funding the crossing guards. The village has said that they will administer the contract. After the cost shift occurs, they'll continue to put out the RFP whenever that has to happen, and to collect fees from the school districts and pay Andy Frame, on behalf of the school districts. So, but they would like to not pay for any portion of it though, at some point sooner or later.
I just might like to open the discussion. My concern is while we are a well-resourced district, not every Skokie district is. So let's say we're like, we could fit the bill, just hypothetically. That could really put the other districts at a disadvantage, which would not be fair to them at all. And I think it's something that we really have to consider when we're thinking about what's our contribution of 68 to the larger conversation of the village.
Has the village given any explanation as to what is exceptional about our village's finances that should make us the exception, given that the poll that was put out shows that the majority of towns and villages do fund this?
They've explained that they have some financial constraints and hardships. Costs have gone up. Managing the program has put a strain on the police department and their resources. And philosophically, John Lockerbie has said that they don't believe that it's their responsibility.
Seems like that last one's the long pole in the tent. Really, because unless they're explaining that there's something exceptional about the financial state of the village, this seems like it is a philosophical decision, not a financial decision, to me.
In general, it's been explained that they have some financial challenges. And,
Sure.
I believe one of the things that they want to do is fund body cams for the police officers, which I think is a valuable contribution to the community. There is a little bit of feeling, though, that school districts are paying for that change.
One of the things that I find a little bit sticky on this is that I actually think it makes a lot of sense to outsource that. And I don't think it's a very good use of our police officers' talents or resources to be doing the kind of work that they've been doing with this. So for me, I have zero difficulty with it. I think they've been really deliberate about trying to find an organization that can actually do that service and do it well and is serving communities very well. My understanding of how things have gone along though is it's like the two issues are just sort of smacked together as if they're the same thing when they're not. One is about outsourcing, which I think makes a lot of sense. And the other one is about the financing of a necessary public safety program and understanding that the village has particular initiatives that they're trying to fund that are going to improve public safety. I think it's the body cams and the ride along program with the social worker, which is just an impressive, amazing program. That's what I read in one of the correspondences that were sent back in August. But for me, it's, if you've got services that are happening outside of school board property, then there is a joint decision or a joint responsibility there, and I'm having a hard time getting around the idea that the village sort of is reneging its responsibility to public safety in one area in order to assist funding it in another. And that tends to be a bit of a sticking point for me, because our mandate is to work on education and the aspects of fulfilling education, and we're responsible for maintaining safety in our schools, but even our mandate about preserving safety of children when they're on public streets, not on school property, we're directed on how to do that also by the police department deciding where we have to have guards. So that to me demonstrates also a shared responsibility, and I'm having a hard time quite wrapping my head around the logic there.
Just, you had talked about not having concerns or issues with the outsourcing. The other superintendents and I feel the same. We absolutely support the outsourcing. We understand that it is, a lot of extra work for the police department, to manage that. And so we're supportive of the idea of the outsourcing piece. And we kind of took it a step further by, collaborate, go out and analyze these stops and see if we couldn't find some ways to reduce costs, and we have. But they would still like to eventually not pay for any portion of it.
I agree with Noel, I don't understand why they're being conflated. If you want a new crosswalk putting across church, for example, so kids can safely walk across, you have to go to the village, that's not a district decision, and that would all fall within this umbrella, so, yeah. I'm fine with outsourcing, makes total sense, but it doesn't make any sense to say, safety of children is 100% on the school's watch.
Especially if we're really are only dealing with two crosswalks that are directly connected to our schools. It just feels, it's hard. It just feels like we're using the children as leverage, right? That the board has to decide who's going to be responsible for their safety, and it's obviously their safety will be our priority if we're put in that situation, but we're also not dictating where, how far away from the school. When is our responsibility then to making sure they get home safely, or to encourage their parents not to let them walk to school if that's.
I don't want to interrupt you.
No, I'm not sure what that was.
Well, I keep going around and around in circles in my head, less about, and I definitely appreciate thinking about it as an outsourcing issue and a funding issue, right? What's the bottom line? Jim, we have a certain expectation of what we think the village should, support. But at the end of the day, they can say no. So I think part of what we have to think about is not necessarily only what they can and should do, but what we will do if ultimately they say, no, we won't fund it. And I think that is the issue that we have to, I do think outsourcing makes a whole heck of a lot of sense. I would love to see the districts, pursue that vigorously. I know you all are, but at the end of the day, we have to decide, what we will do if the village says no. The responsibility has to, the funding of the responsibility has to fall somewhere. So I guess the bottom line is that they do have first right of refusal to say no. There's nothing that changes that.
Yeah, we
And I think
we can't make them pay.
Right, and I just think that should be said, so that we realize that, because what you're asking us is what we would prefer, but also what we are willing to do is the second part of what I think you're asking.
I want to go back to the idea of the benefits of outsourcing. I don't think it's as clear cut that it would be a benefit. There was an article that I saw in the Evanston Roundtable from late 2021 that discussed their transition to the use of Andy Frame, the fact that they were having difficulty with Andy Frame providing guards, the cost of having their officers then have to step in. It was over $100 an hour. I think it was about $150 an hour to have substitutes step in. I know that there are other districts and other towns that have made similar moves and described them as cost-cutting measures in recent years. I think that one of the proposals from the village was to postpone this a year, as far as putting off this.
Yes, that was another, before they struck a deal with Evans, so that was also an offer from John Walker.
And I think that accepting that offer would give us the opportunity to learn from these other communities. Was this actually financially beneficial? Because I think often a decision to privatize a public function is presented as a financial benefit, and then it is not.
Yeah, and I can definitely say it will be, from what has been described to us, it will be more costly to outsource because the hourly rate from the crossing guards is approximately the same, give or take 20 cents or something an hour, I believe. So that cost is about the same, but then we're paying an additional approximate $10,000 a year for the management portion. So the outsourcing is not a cost savings measure. It does provide a benefit for the police department that they don't have to manage all that and use their manpower to be able to do that. But it is more expensive, to be able to outsource, but then it's also going to be a lot more expensive if the police or the village says, no, we're not going to pay for any portion of it. It's sort of a two-tiered extra expense for us.
I also don't know, I'm thinking about the year, I don't know if we would be able to see evidence from the village perspective as to whether there was substantial cost savings in a year for us to kind of assess whether that was legit, so to speak, but I hear, I would think maybe a year would give us a chance, but now that they've struck a deal with one of the districts, is that potential year option off the table, Jim, to delay the decision?
I don't believe so, but I would have to follow up with John. Another alternative that John Lockerbie has shared is you guys can just do it all on your own. You can hire your own, manage your own, and do that. That's obviously an option. That'll create some extra work, and we'd still have 100% of the expenses due to the grant route as well.
Well, if that's the case, though, we're doing it on our own, then we're also going to be responsible to the village for ensuring that the program meets all of the different expectations and requirements that the public safety units have determined, right? So it's not like a unilateral thing where we can run it however we want to either.
Correct. I believe that's correct. Yes.
Beholden to
I'm not suggesting a desire for us to.
No, I just want to make sure that that's stated publicly, because, I think that's also a thing here. I mean, I can actually think of a few cost-saving measures that the village might think of other than cutting this program, but that's beyond my voluntary non-pay rate. That's something I have written to them about before. And ultimately that's their problem to solve. I'm just having a hard time resolving my head around the fact that this is the way that they're trying to address it versus some of the other kinds of measures that even came out in community surveys about what community members in Skokie are actually willing to pay more for. And it turns out there was a large indicator in the community survey, which was done in the village meeting. It was presented a few months ago. I looked at it in the agenda, and there's several people that are actually talking about how they want to maintain services, and they would be willing to pay more for particular services in the community. And the response that always comes out as a celebratory thing is the fact that the village never seems to increase taxes. And it's like, well, but you've got all of these members of the community that have actually said for certain kinds of services, they actually would be willing to put in a bit of an extra, crossing guards were not on that list. But
I don't know how much public awareness there is in terms of crossing guards and how the partnership has worked over the years.
Right, so this is one of those situations as well, where I think, if the public had a greater awareness of the fact that this is even an issue that's being discussed, it might actually it'd be, I'm not so exactly clear on what's on offer here, other than if you go, we can say yes to the anti-frame thing, but it seems like tacked onto that directly is an agreement that we're going to take the full financing of this, and we can either take it immediately, or we can put it off for a year, or we can do it in a staggered manner.
Those are the offers so far.
Yes, and even in reading Mr. Long's letter, it seemed like he said 30-70, but then he didn't say the next year, is that it? Is it done, or is it 30-70 and we still have a
I
cost
believe
sharing
that was the
situation?
intent after it got to 30-70.
It didn't go, because his letter was not clear on that, and I wasn't quite sure about what that means, 30% of the increase versus 30% of the.
That's what he's clarifying now, it's just the increase, it's not the,
But I don't
so
know
the
what that
increase
means.
is only $10,000, so,
Right.
it's not splitting the cost, the full cost in a tiered down manner, it's just that increase that I.
The $10,000
piece of it.
administrative piece, so we'd still be responsible for 100% of the cost of the actual guards, but that additional 10,000, that would be
Right.
staggered. So it's still how much more expensive for us per year.
I will say that Evanston reached an agreement with them. The superintendent there was not part of any of the meetings that we had with them. They don't typically associate with the Skokie School District, so I kind of look at them as sort of a separate entity. They're not really part of our Skokie School District Cooperative, I guess I would say. So we had no knowledge of them working on that or making that agreement until we were informed of it afterward.
You heard what you need to continue to negotiate, or?
So, let me see if I can.
It's all very clear, I know.
I don't think we've given him any.
I know, I think we all know how we feel, it's just, we all see the rock and a hard place that you're.
John has told me if we have another counter offer, he's willing to entertain that.
But the most reasonable counter offers have already been.
Well, I was hoping that our good faith effort to try to reduce costs by going out and identifying stops that weren't used, and then instead of them paying for the first 4 and then us paying for the remainder, because now we're at only 6.
Right.
Under the old agreement, they'd still have paid for 4, so their cost would be
Right.
the same, and it would be our costs going down. And I said, well, why don't we split the 6, and instead of you pay for the first 4? So we've offered something that reduces cost, that gets, by going with the outsourcing that, gets officers back on the beat, and, and we would be incurring additional costs because of the management piece, and we've agreed to that, as well, if we were to split the cost of the 6. So we've offered something that does achieve some of their goals, or achieves all of their goals to an extent, I guess. But
And
not
that one was
the
rejected.
entire financial piece.
And that was what was rejected, the splitting of the cost, even though we'd be picking up the management piece, and that's been rejected.
Correct.
So I don't mean to sound harsh here, but I'm like, I don't see any other options other than, I don't see where there is to negotiate unless it's, 2 and 4, or, there isn't really a negotiation if they're not interested in paying anything. It's either.
Take it or.
Right,
That's not a negotiation.
Yeah, that's
Well,
not a
it goes back to
negotiation.
Jeff.
The word
Yeah.
negotiation implies that,
Jeff's
there's
point is
the give and
philosophical
take
about
on both
financial
sides, and that does not seem to really be
They no longer want
be
to.
the case.
I mean, at this point, I guess I could, in an attempt at fairness, from their position, their negotiation is when the cost should occur. That's what they've offered up essentially at this point. They are, John's been adamant about that they don't feel like it's their responsibility, so that they want to get out of paying for any of it, whether it's today or whether it's a year from now, or whether it's just, covering the small piece for a couple of years of that administrative.
There's a part of me that would like to actually hear, and this is where it was kind kind of problematic in the meeting that Joe and I attended, because initially that issue was put on the consent agenda without ever having had a public hearing, and it was put on the consent agenda in a way that didn't make it very clear that these two issues are actually being approved together. And interestingly enough, at a meeting that we attended, somebody pulled off a consent agenda item from the consent agenda, and it subsequently entailed a 45-minute discussion between the trustees about something on a consent agenda. And so there's a part of me that would actually like to hear where the trustees actually come out on this, because they haven't had an opportunity to discuss that in a public meeting. So at this point, it's not even, because it was on the consent agenda as though it had already been approved by all of the trustees. And the public at this point doesn't know where the trustees themselves land on this issue. We've heard from Mr. Lockerbie, we've heard from Chief Baker, but you know, in terms of the elected representatives that are supposed to be making those decisions, we haven't heard where they land on it. So that makes it really difficult for us then to make a decision either, because we're not really sure about where our elected officials who are supposed to represent the public interest of Skokie are actually landing on it, because they haven't had a situation where it's been placed to the point where they can discuss it.
To your point, yesterday I had about an hour-long conversation with John Lockerbie on the phone, trying to explore this from all angles. And one of the desires he expressed was that when we discuss this, that we really convey their position, their challenges, their side of it. And I promised him, I said, well, John, I pride myself on being transparent in how we do things. I'm not out to get the village, I'm not out to get the police department, I'm not out to get you personally. Absolutely, I will convey what the interests are, of the village and the police department in this. And I feel like I've done that tonight, where I've shared what their desire is and what their challenges are. But at that point, I asked him the same thing. I said, well, John, can you guarantee me that you are sharing with the trustees and the mayor how our side of it? Because like you said, they've never had a public discussion on this. So I don't know the answer to your question as to how much information they've gotten, or whether the information is one-sided, or whether they've attempted to make it more a well-rounded discussion that conveys what our interests and concerns are as well. I'm not sure.
I've had a conversation with one trustee who said, basically was told that, the districts didn't like it, that they were gonna be fine with it back August, and then there had been no discussion of it since that point. Right, so this is one of those concerns I have, is if things are going on a consent agenda, then it means it's already gone up for public discussion. It's never had a public discussion, so then how can we as board members figure out what to do if we actually don't realize where our different elected officials even land on this issue? I find that very difficult. Then it's not just the difficulty of like what Mr. Lockerbie is proposing or trying to negotiate when there's not really a negotiation, but also the responsibility to transparency to the public and to being able to understand where our trustees are actually landing on an issue that is contentious between the staffing areas of two areas of government. That's a responsibility I feel like the trustees actually have to the public, and one that, if we don't know what that is and it just gets voted through with no discussion, it's also not you have to give it an option for them to discuss things, and they haven't done that. So they haven't met their minimum responsibility in terms of making the decision or talking about the decision, and perhaps that's something that we could ask them to do, since they should actually do that. We're having a discussion about it, but they haven't discussed it yet. So it seems like it's a fait accompli as far as the mayor is concerned and as far as Mr. Lockerbie is concerned, but I don't have any sense of where the trustees are, and ultimately they're the ones responsible to the public to vote. I don't know where to go from there. I'm gonna leave it to, maybe we'll collectively come up with something, but it seems to me that it's premature for us to say, here's what we're gonna do with this, when our elected officials haven't actually discussed it.
Not a but. but not quite an and either. No, I guess I really substantially appreciate the, you know, the context in which we're trying to make this decision very deliberately, very publicly, and that hasn't happened in the village. I guess my question is it a fait accompli in terms of, you know, whether it's been discussed in, you know, in or out of the consent agenda? The status of this at the village is that this decision can and will be made by the village manager? Does the village manager has to have is the village giving the village manager the authority to make this decision or to negotiate? Or is there something still left to be decided at the trustee level? That's the piece that I'm as I listen to Noelle, is there a piece still outstanding that should be managed or just addressed before all of our school districts decide what we're going to do? Or is that just what we wish would have happened in their deliberation in public about these decisions, but we still have, you know, no choice but to make a decision about what we're going to do? I guess that's my takeaway from what you're saying is, you know, you're talking about a process that didn't unfold. How does that process impact where we are right now, or that lack of process? Does the village manager still have the latitude to negotiate relatively singularly with us on this?
That's my impression.
So I don't know if it even matters isn't the right word, but I don't know the implications or the any change that would happen if even the trustees decided to, you know, engage in discussion on it. It seems like he's been given the latitude to manage this situation aside from the board, the trustees' direction on it.
I mean, one of the things he shared with me was that in order for them to continue funding the crossing guards, they'd have to raise the vehicle sticker price by $5. I believe that's what he said. And the way I interpret that, what that really means is in order to buy the body cams and to fund these other things, they would have to raise the cost by $5. But, you know.
Per year, per vehicle in Skokie.
I believe that was my understanding. I believe that's.
Jim, how much time in terms of school district time, the clock of the school districts, do we have to, you know, see through this matter? And I know that, you know, our timeline is different from, you know, public works and public safety.
So again, I see, as Noelle alluded to, I see two different decisions really here, you know, from, you know, the village and the school districts. One of them is the outsourcing, which, you know, we are fine with the outsourcing, even if that incurs some additional cost. You know, that's something that I believe we're okay with. That's something that, you know, can be done in shorter order, I believe. The other piece is the whole, you know, the cost piece. I mean, that's really the sticky piece, the outsourcing piece. And Jeff, I hear your concerns and about, you know, not quite knowing what outsourcing, you know, the quality of outsourcing, what that'll look like. You know, it's hard to know for sure until it happens. But at least the other superintendents and school boards and I believe we're willing to give that a shot, the outsourcing part. So, you know, I think one of the things they're looking for is our agreement. But for them, the agreement is a package agreement. You know, it's not that we're agreeing to outsource. After they had pulled it from the agenda several weeks ago, they had wanted to put it back on the agenda at this last Monday's village meeting. And after John hearing that our board, District 69's board, had board meetings this week where, you know, both the boards wanted to publicly, you know, have a discussion about it, and other school boards are also deliberating. He pulled it, you know, again, to give us some opportunity to be able to have some discussion. My assumption is in 2 weeks, it's 2 weeks from last Monday, would be back on to approve the ND frame.
Actually, the first Tuesday in June.
First Tuesday in June.
This is still my sticking point on it. If they're talking about procedures that elected officials are supposed to follow. An item that is going on the consent agenda has already been had a public hearing where trustees have discussed the issue in public, which this has never happened. or it's supposed to be something that's crucial to the functioning financially, like you have to pay your bills. This is neither of those things. So, personally, as a member of Skokie's community, I am planning on having some correspondence about that, because by my understanding, they have to have a conversation about it. They can't put it on the consent agenda if it's never been aired to the public. And I even looked at what they talk about being on the consent agenda, and that's specifically there. That anything that's on the consent agenda has to be something that has been heard and discussed publicly at a public meeting by elected officials and the mayor, and that's not happened for this
I
issue.
did share that concern that several board members had about, how we perceive how the Open Meetings Act is supposed to work with regards to consent agenda and, new items, especially, that surpass a certain financial threshold. I did share that concern with John. I believe he was going to consult with our lawyer, and so I don't know whether the intent is for it to be on a consent agenda at this next meeting or whether it'll be a discussion. I don't know, but I did share the concern that we weren't entirely sure as superintendents and school boards whether their village trustees and the mayor were fully informed of everything else by having a discussion. He did acknowledge, my sharing that concern.
Maybe this is a crazy, naive, silly, or wonderful idea, I don't know. Because we all have all taken the training on Open Meetings Act, and we all know that that is the correct protocol, and you do have to discuss. Could our next move in said negotiation, that's not a negotiation, be, we want this to go up for public discussion collectively as every district, and until that happens, we're not negotiating? I mean, I don't think we're actually asking for anything that isn't actually the obligation of the village.
One district has already settled though, or negotiated, so there will be.
Yeah, again, I
That's
view
not
Evan
our- They function without
65
consent.
as sort of an outside entity to the village and to the larger issue.
And they're already choosing any phrase to rest.
I mean, at the end of the day, it's a reallocation of tax dollars, and if people are okay with the tax dollars coming out of the school's educational budget for safety instead of the.
I mean, we're not asking anyone to do anything except talk about it.
Publicly.
Yeah.
What is
Radical maybe, but it could work.
What is your sense of the village leadership, Jim, and is that taking a stand as opposed to making a decision right now? Is that even something in your knowledge of the leadership in the township? Do you think that that's something that they would, I think it would have to be collective, just either, I would imagine that something like that would have to be collective, and it may not even work, but I don't think it would. I don't know, is that something that you think?
As far as I understand through the other superintendents, through conversations with Joe, who's talked to the board presidents, there is a collective distaste, I believe, for the cost shift. And that is shared by all the superintendents as well.
What's the worst? I mean, I look at everything in this way. What's the worst that's gonna happen? They say no. Okay, so then let's do something else, right? Like, there's no bad part. Like, there's no bad aspect of this.
I guess the question is, in a situation like that, it would seem to me that in order to hear the school district's perspective, school boards may need to send representatives to a meeting to ensure that those perspectives are heard. As a superintendent who's not a community member, it's an awkward place for me to go to a village board meeting and to advocate for something. I would believe it would have to be, village residents who are elected officials talking to elected officials as opposed to, a superintendent going and, doing something like that.
Are you saying something more like public comment, or I was imagining something different from what Annie was saying. I was imagining some kind of a collective document or statement. Were you thinking about more of a presence of all the districts, or some kind of a statement from all the districts?
Well, I mean, Jim has to go back to Lockerbie with what we wanna do, right? So if collectively every district was like, the next move is we want this to be an actual discussion with the trustees, we will have representation from the districts there, but so I know Noelle and Joe already came, but if every single district collectively has a statement, it's read, public comment, and then they can at least have a discussion, and they've heard everybody, even though they've already heard everybody, we could at least come back to this meeting and say, you know what, like collectively, the trustees are in total alignment with him, and it's just not gonna happen, and there is no room for movement, versus like, there are people who really don't want this, so how can we have a continued conversation about what to do with that information?
They won't be able to respond to us in public
Correct.
comment though, so
Right.
that's the, you know.
Yeah, but they'll be able, I mean, they're gonna have their opinions before, right? And that's what their discussion's gonna be. I think it's more about like a collective, presence from the districts, and also recognizing like we are not singularly looking at this as a 60 issue, but a Skokie issue.
So the request would be for it to become a discussion item, because again, public comment may or may not become a discussion item. And right, let's just be, you know, public comment may or may not become a discussion item.
I mean, they make it clear it's not gonna be.
You know, not every, you know, public body, responds the same way to public comments. We have a practice
Right,
here,
there's our
as
guide.
recommended
yeah,
by
there's our
OMA, that, you know, when somebody has a public comment, it's
Mayor
not a
personally
back and forth
responds to
discussion.
public comments.
But from what I understand, the mayor does
You know, from
engage,
experience.
you know, in conversation with people in public comment.
Unilaterally, so the trustees don't speak, the mayor does, it seems to be the practice there.
You know, so,
Just
so you
again,
make,
so then
so
you
you make
can
it
hear
some
from your
response.
elected officials about where they stand, they're not able to ask questions, like we don't, how can we be an informed public about the people that we elect to represent us if we can't hear them representing us?
Well, and here, I guess here's what I would say. I don't have the power to prohibit you guys from asking questions and interacting. You're the elected officials, you're my bosses, right?
Well, that's where, yeah, like the card we can play is that we would have to approve you spending a penny on school card, right? And again, that just plays into using the children's language and making us the bad guys that voted against school safety, right?
Right now, the only two options that they're presenting are why don't you pay now, or why don't you pay in a year? I'd suggest we say we'll consider paying in a year and continue to try to have a conversation with them. I mean, I just don't know what other options they're offering us. That seems to be the only two.
Well, but actually it's outsourcing and a cost shift now, or outsourcing
Right, they
and a
are
cost shift later.
right, they are not presenting any other option other than the outsourcing. And so that's what I mean, is that right now, what they're offering is we could outsource now and you pay for it, or we could outsource now.
I
and we
believe
pay
I
for it
forwarded
for
that
a year.
I believe I forwarded that communication from John Lockerbie, you know, expressing a willingness to push off the full cost shift for 1 year. I could certainly explore whether that's still on the table. And John and I are planning to, you know, try to have a follow-up conversation, assuming I can have something I can, you know, work with.
Again, just looking at what other towns did, I've seen where some towns did like a third over 3 years that the cost shift happened. I didn't see any where the cost shift was, we're doing it now, we're doing it 100%, good luck. Except not necessarily the good luck, but.
Well, that, to get back to Ann's point, that's the trustee conversation. This is the line you want to cross. And is this the only cost share? Are there other levers that can be pulled between the village and us?
I'm not aware of any other partnership with the, you know, with the village or with the police department. Now, you know, we used to employ a part-time police liaison officer. But, you know, we've stopped doing that a year and a half ago, I believe.
Well, and I don't mean to think about the worst thing that can happen, but I guess I'm just, you know, I don't know even if there is an opportunity for district representatives and officials to be heard, to, you know, have the issue engaged. We don't know ultimately if it's going to, you know, make a difference, and so I think we still have to be kind of thinking and prepared for, you know, what our bottom line is. I do think that if we I don't imagine how we cannot, I'm just gonna say it, fund the safety of our children.
Right.
I just, end of story. The question is
I don't know
how.
how we could not do it, I'm not sure how they could not do it either.
Right,
Good
right,
conscience,
right.
but-
And so it's a question of whether we want to do it now or do it later. Having said that, I think a strong position statement from our district, if that's the case, needs to come forward.
Yeah.
You know, and I'm not saying that we shouldn't try these other things, but at the end of the day, that's why the timeline, I asked you about the timeline, Jim, because I know the decisions have to be made so that we're lined up for, I mean, do we need for summer classes? We don't need the crossing guards for summer.
Yeah, we would have one crossing guard over at Stetson. And we communicated with the current liaison who works with it, so he, you know, with the crossing guard, so he's aware of our summer need.
So really the June deadline that, we're putting, that we've heard is really when we have to have some decision, or September or August.
Well, you know, if it's a matter of saying, so here's what I'm hearing and maybe thinking, you know, from some of the ideas you put out there. I can approach John tomorrow and see if there's still, if the offer is still on the table to defer the cost shift for a year, in which case we move forward with Andy Frayne and the current division of financial responsibility, or even, you know, my suggestion of 3 and 3 is 4 and 2. You know, I could explore whether that's an option, and then that gives more time for maybe a fuller discussion of conveying the school district's interests going forward.
Is it worth trying 4 and 2? I mean, 3 and 3 was rejected, but is 4 and 2 worth trying?
Well, 4 and 2 was them paying for 4 and us paying for 2, because that's the way, that's the way it, currently would work, given the language that they pay for the first one for each school district, so. My offer to go through the 3 and 3 reduces cost for them, reduces cost for us, and then we'd still be on the hook for the administrative fee. So, we're taking on, the cost of one more guard and the $10,000 administrative fee. So, we're making some financial concession there.
And I derailed you with that question. I'm sorry. You were saying that you could go to John Lockerbie to see if the 1-year deferral
It's still on the table, and then because again, I see the 2 different action items, at least the way I would see it, one would be, outsourcing with Andy Frayne, improving that contract. It's sort of the mechanical business function of approving a new contract. The second piece of funding, it would seem that does not have to be a closed decision immediately, at least from my perspective. I think John might feel differently about that.
Well, for our purposes, how can you maybe at least respond so Jim has some tangible takeaway from this meeting? Do we have a strong response to the outsourcing option? I mean, I'll go out and say, it's not ideal for the reasons that, Jeff suggests, but that, I certainly would support supporting outsourcing. So do we have maybe we can at least give Jim concrete feedback from us on that that way you could tell John Lockerbie at least, one piece, even though he may see it as a package, we could at least say that this is where the board is landing so far, and then engage the conversation about the deferral. But, I don't know,
So
what do you guys think about that?
So if the board were to create a position statement, I don't know if we have anybody who's a communications specialist on the board,
Okay.
So I mean, that can certainly be an approach. I can talk to them and see if, they're willing to defer that, their sort of firmness on the cost shift for the year. And then, we could agree to go along with the Andy Frayne outsourcing piece. And then the board can write the position statement. It can be delivered to the mayor and the village trustees, as you guys get. And then, kind of see where it goes from there.
Can I ask a clarifying question? If we say we want the deferral, I would imagine, wouldn't there be some isn't the idea that, if I'm hearing correctly, some people are like, let's just do that so we can keep having a conversation, but what would be the point of having a conversation if we're locked into this contractual obligation?
Well, the Andy Frame contract, to my understanding, is
It's a 1 year, initially it's a 1 year agreement.
I mean with the village.
Right.
Right, to say like, we are officially releasing, you're officially releasing the village, you know, your fiscal responsibility to us to be able to.
I haven't, John has not referred to, or I haven't seen anything that amounts to us signing off.
Okay.
Is the current agreement in writing? I don't know.
There's an old IGA, I believe. Is that correct?
Between the school and the village?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
It doesn't address crossing guards at all.
Oh, no, okay, all right, no. Okay, then we have nothing in writing to begin with on that, so.
But we wouldn't be signing up for anything other than a deferral and a year opportunity to, continue the conversation and write our strong position statement. It feels insufficient, but I mean, I think, we have to give you some direction today, so.
Well, it's a next step, and it gives me something to go back and talk to John about, tomorrow, and something to continue to explore.
Can we all collectively say we agree for outsourcing, period?
That's what we're.
But then not even mention the
I don't think there's any
finance part.
objections to outsourcing, right? Make
I
yourself.
mean, Jeff's obviously voiced some concerns.
If that was,
Thank you, yes.
Sorry, Jeff.
oh no, it's okay. It seems like the smaller issue of the two.
And it's a 1 year contract, so if it's not working, the village can do it again, like, reevaluate that, and I think that's prudent to give it a whirl with a new vendor for a year instead of locking it into like a longer term contract.
Yeah, it's not like a 5-year contract that, after a year, we discover things are not going good and we're unhappy, but we're stuck for 5 years, with that outsourcing provider.
Although, Chief Baker, how many people replied to the RFP, out of curiosity?
There were 3 vendors.
3 vendors.
So there are other alternatives if Andy Frame were not to, work out everybody's satisfaction.
All right, I think I've got enough to.
Glad we could help.
To follow up, with John tomorrow, and I'll keep you posted on how that conversation goes.
Thank you for having this conversation, because I know it's not fun.
Okay, all right, moving on to the ESSER funds and family support.
Okay, so we have Bonnie Agnasanti, Township Supervisor in the audience with us tonight, District 68 parent. Bonnie and I had a conversation several weeks ago about an IGA that District 219 created with the township, giving them a portion of their ESSER funds to be able to help support families in need. And she wanted to explore whether that was something that the District 68 School Board would be interested in doing as well. So, we've talked a little bit about it here. I believe 219 gave $350,000 of their ESSER money, approximately 4.3% of their total ESSER dollars, to assist District 219 families with needs such as food insecurity, medical bills, childcare, and rental assistance, to help combat the adverse effects of COVID in particular. When she brought up the idea, I kind of thought, well, should we allocate money to the township to be able to provide some of those needs, or would it make sense to allocate it to, our office of family engagement? And Deanna and I had a long conversation about that, and we don't feel really prepared to be able to make a good evaluation of, the needs of parents for some of those kinds of things. Whereas it would seem like, Bonnie and the township has an infrastructure built to be able to do that in a much more effective way than we could ever replicate. Our ESSER funds are all fully allocated at this time, but if the board were to choose to want to give some money to the township for these purposes, we can write an amendment to our ESSER grant, which means then our board funds would pay for some things that we had allocated ESSER to pay for, thus freeing up some of the ESSER money to be able to give to
This wasn't a decision that I could unilaterally make, so I wanted to open that up for discussion with all of you to see what you felt about, doing something similar to what 219 has done. I would say not on the same financial scale. They're a much larger district and received a lot more ESSER funds than we did. And I believe, and Bonnie, if I mischaracterize this, please let me know. I know some of the money was going for childcare so that high school kids didn't have to provide childcare so they could attend school.
Correct.
That's probably not a need that we would see as much of here, hopefully. Hopefully we don't have our kids who are having to provide childcare and can't attend school.
Yes.
It's not impossible to imagine that could happen in some isolated cases. Yeah, sure. So, probably not on the same scale, but, so at any rate, let me open that up to you guys and.
Can I ask a question I maybe missed in the reading, and I apologize if I did?
Yeah.
The current ESSER funds that District 68 has already allocated, can you remind us of the kinds of things that it's been allocated for? Because part of my thinking about possibly shifting the funding for those to other districts to lines and other District 68 funds, to me it depends on kind of what we would be funding. So, I mean, what have we used our funds currently for, and about how much was that? And again, I apologize if the District 68 ESSER fund amount was in the memo.
I can absolutely answer that question. Ryan?
One word.
Did I miss it in the reading?
No, we didn't outline it all there. It is outlined on our webpage, I believe.
Yeah, Dr. Samajeni, when we had to originally, I believe for ESSER 3, provide a description of that plan, although we did receive ESSER 1 and 2 before that. So we've used it for a lot of professional development for our teachers, some of it really focusing on remote learning last year, as well as summer school last year, I think the year before, upcoming years, MTSS coordinators for the next few years, supplies for some of our students, new library books for our students to take things back, the ionizers in all the schools, we paid with ESSER funds.
Generators.
Laptops, the generator project, in order to keep our servers and everything going for remote learning, things like that. Part of the capital project at Malloy, so that they could, have better air quality and things of that nature with their addition and big construction project. So it's been a slew of things. Not to say that local funds wouldn't have been used on some of those things anyway. I think Dr. Simon and Jenny and I just really wanted to focus and make sure that we used it all and there were definitely things added because of, the pandemic, and things we just hit harder because of the pandemic with the funding and the grant choices.
So, I think to Ryan's point, some of the things funded with ESSER money were things that we would have done anyway, without the pandemic, without that extra infusion of money. So if we were to write an amendment to free up some of the ESSER money, some of those things that we would have previously paid for out of board funds and that now we're paying for out of ESSER funds could go back to board funds in order to be able to contribute to the township so that they can help support families in need. And just to be clear, the conversation Bonnie and I had would be that these funds that District 68 would contribute, if we do contribute, would be allocated to go to District 68 family specific.
Correct, yes.
And would that be you working with Diana's office specifically, or how would that?
So is it all right if I answer?
Sorry.
So our township has a full-time social worker and a part-time social worker. That office works with Deanna's office quite frequently. So there's kind of constant back and forth and referrals happening between those two offices. But we also just have people who are coming in
from many different places, the UL Center, maybe sometimes from the police station might be bringing people over. If they walk in the door, they're gonna see our social workers. Now, the way that the social workers were able to allocate what funding went to D219 students is basically ask, do you have a high school student? And if they answered yes, then we give them a different application and they have to show transcripts. So we were on the phone, we're talking to somebody over at D219, so that we would be verifying in a similar way.
And Deanna makes referrals to the township, and the township lets her know about, families that have needs as well, so.
Yeah, it's a back and forth.
Yeah.
for
And
sure.
sorry, I mispronounced her name again.
Well,
So,
Jim/Ryan. Is it appropriate to ask or do we already know the amount of funds we're really talking about here? Because I know it wouldn't be necessarily clearly as high an amount because we're a smaller district, but do we have any sense of what percentage or amount of our existing ESSER funds might be available for shift to our local funds so that those funds could go to?
So in terms of the student body, I'd say we have about a third or less of the students they have there. If we were to sort of replicate, proportionally, that would be, a little over $100,000.
That's helpful, thank you.
And again, the number could be different. It could be more, it could be less. It's, I guess I'm looking for how interested are you in doing this? And then, is there a financial parameter that you like to create, or would you like for Ryan and I to have some consultation, look at some of the items, and then come back with a suggested number? Assuming you want to do it, though. I mean, that you've got to let us know whether that's
I would like to, before I can probably get a sense of whether we should do it, I think the numbers would help me to, I know I have a value for it, but I think, our fiduciary responsibility means to put our value in relationship to, our finances, so to speak. So I wouldn't mind a little bit more mapping out of what it might look like. I really appreciate the 3 questions in the board brief. Also, what do we do after those funds are gone? Have we established an expectation that we are going to be able to support District 68 families at a certain amount? And if we don't have those ESSER funds any longer, are we committing district funds longer term? This sort of thing. Those are all things that I think we really should consider, and maybe not today, but I would love to know what my colleagues think about, in particular, bullet number 1. What if we were to do this? Is it only while we have the funds, or is it something that we would be wanting to institutionalize in our district? So I think those are questions for us.
I'll just start out, and anybody else can respond to that as well. So ESSER funds are temporary funds. Bonnie and I had some conversation earlier today, and she had thought she had heard something about a potential ESSER 4. We haven't heard that yet. ESSER funds were created because of the pandemic. We don't know whether more funds will be approved, by the federal government and distributed out to states or not yet. Presumably, if the pandemic goes away, some of the needs subside. All the needs will never subside. A lot of those needs have always existed, and unfortunately, probably always will. I think, ESSER funds were created for these kinds of purposes to, support students and families, school districts, and village entities as well. The village also got, I think, $15 million in ESSER funds. Once that goes away, it might be a little bit more awkward from one taxing body to give their money to another taxing body. And this is just my thought, because our tax dollars come in from all of our community members and then would get reallocated to just some. And I don't know how you guys or, how all the people who pay the taxes would feel about that once ESSER funds are gone. So that it raises some questions, I guess, versus what we might do when we have the availability of of ESSER funds, and it would be a different game, or a different conversation if we were allocating board funds. I would probably have more hesitation to recommend that.
That's my only worry, is kind of establishing that pipeline of support, and then, because we don't know if there's gonna be a number 5 or 4 or whatever with distribution. Is that something that we can afford to start, or would we be communicating that this is very short term if we were to make that move?
I mean, it's certainly up to what you guys would like. If you want to say this is, if we want to do it, we do it while we have these, the current ESSER funds, but once those funds are gone, then,
I do think the narrative that it is an exceptional time and that these funds were intended to treat an exceptional time. If we are in a situation where we're using those funds to pay for things we would have paid for anyway, we aren't using them exceptionally, and the opportunity presented itself. We agree with the premise and practice. I'd support it, but yeah, I think we would love to see the plan in detail.
In principle, the thing that comes to mind about how some people would get it, but not others, is there are other things that happen at the district level with district funds that are the same things for equity purposes. For instance, we pay more for students that need services from NTDSE versus other students who don't necessarily have those same needs, learning needs in terms of equity. I think it's worthwhile as a conversation, but I do, if we're thinking comprehensively about what do students need in order to be able to learn and grow, those stability aspects are really, really important to ensure that students have the, social determinants that allow them to then engage in meaningful learning based on their abilities. So, we can talk about it in terms of ESSER funds and just sort of see what's going on. Those needs aren't going to go away, but in some sense, we also don't know what is going to happen later on. So for the extraordinary times portion of it, there's a lot of aspects about this that make a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, that's an easier leap, than there is like a longer term. And Bonnie and I haven't had conversations about subsequent years when ESSER goes away. That hasn't been part of the conversation at this point. So, that doesn't appear to be an ask at this point. I think at this point it's sort of the more immediate crisis level need that they're seeing and requesting some help and support for.
I think in principle, I like the idea quite a bit. I don't know if it's possible if the IGA with 219 could help to guide us, if that's something that we could look at.
Yeah, Bonnie shared a copy of
I think
the
that would be
IGA with
really
us.
helpful.
Yeah.
To, for example, what would the criteria be for how the funds would be used, things like that.
Yeah, it's not a super detailed IGA. I think, Bonnie's been given a good amount of latitude to be able to, I think one of the stipulations is that, it has to be, current families of District 219. So that's sort of the criteria, and the criteria that's outlined in the IGA. I think the other criteria, Bonnie has latitude, if I'm correct, to be able to determine the need levels.
Yeah, it's pretty wide ranging on what we can spend it on. I think they have to be D219 students, currently enrolled D219 students, and then they have to present some sort of, the way that the IGA is written right now, that those families have to present some sort of hardship that was caused by the pandemic. It's really those two things, and then we're allowed to spend it on housing security, food security, mental health and wellness, behavioral wellness, and also, as you mentioned, childcare, and then other material needs.
I have just a quick question. Many students, 68 students also have siblings in 219, so if there was an IGA there, then to support those families, how would you allocate the ESSER funds between the two districts?
Yes, good question. I actually just recently had this kind of hopeful hypothetical with our social workers. And so I guess I should back up and say we spent through the entire IGA, the $350,000 that was given to us last year. So right now we do not have any more funding in that IGA. We have requested a renewal, and we're waiting to see what D219 wants to do. So, there's a few different ways to answer that question. One is we do not get the renewal of the IGA with D219, and then therefore we would be looking for D68 students, and they would get money pulled just from that fund. If D219 does decide that they want to step forward and renew the IGA, I really think that having those funds, some flexibility in those funds on where we pull from would be useful, so that if there's more in one, we can go there first as a funding source.
Right, because it's shared families.
Because there'd be shared families. Mhm. I mean, the other way we could do it is just split down the middle for what those costs are. But one thing that is, I'll back up since you're allowing me a little bit of the floor and say that something that's been really nice about having the flexibility of the funds that were allotted throughout D219 is the ability to just make people whole on their bills. Whereas we offer many different financial service assistance grants through our office, but they all have a limit. We could really, someone could come to us with, we wrote a check as big as $18,000 for someone who was just in that much back rent debt. And we were able to make that family whole, which then allowed that family, the mother needed to get back surgery, and there was just like a whole host of other things, and they were really going to face homelessness if we weren't able to do that. So they had 4 children, and all of those children are now still enrolled in schools, D219 and some feeder schools.
So the traditional sources you had that had caps could not make them whole, but by using this money, you were able to
Correct. So
subsidize some of the other ways you were able to help.
correct,
Okay.
correct.
Just to be clear, if District 68 engaged in an IGA, the money wouldn't be pooled if with District 219, if they were to reestablish their IGA, it would only go to District 68 families.
Yes. So I believe that Board Member Sullivan's question was, if a family came and they had a child that was enrolled in D68 and in D219, how would we proceed? And we would still be working out some of those procedural guidelines. But if a family came to us and they had a child enrolled in school district 73 and a half, this money would not be open to them. It would only be open to a family that had children enrolled in school district 68.
So am I hearing that the board would be interested in the administration's recommendation on a number to be able to move forward with something like that? Is that? So I'm hearing interest, right?
Yes.
In creating an IGA that provides some of our ESSER funds to the township. And you would like Ryan and I to take a look at the finances and come back and with a dollar amount recommendation for what that would be.
You took the words right out of my mouth.
Okay. I have direction then. Ryan and I will follow up next week and take a look at our ESSER, how the ESSER funds are distributed and figure out what things we feel like we would pay for that we could pull back into board funds, and then we'll have some further discussion, make sure you guys are okay with an amount, and then we'll follow up with Bonnie. Have I captured it? Right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
At least we gave you one thing.
Go.
Okay.
All those previous short board meetings.
Yeah, this wasn't going to be the shortest one. Okay. In the interest of board meetings, if we're ready to move on to our policy first readings. Yes?
Yes.
Yeah.
I know we discussed in our pre-meeting if we would read through these.
Yes, and we agreed that we're not going to go through each policy where I describe the changes in each policy. You've all been provided the policies with the changes. So I'm gonna make this really simple tonight. I'll read off the names of the policies and I'll just ask if anybody has any questions. And
we'll see how quickly we can get this done. So our first policy up for first reading is policy 770, attendance and truancy. Any questions? Moving on. Policy 780, release time for religious instruction/observance. Hearing no questions. Policy 7160, student appearance. You have one on?
Sorry, yeah, I'll be really quick.
On which one, student appearance?
Student appearance, yeah. So the language is must not disrupt the educational process. That to me leaves a lot of room for, say, someone to say, well, that girl's clothing is disruptive to said boy's learning. I researched a bunch of different policies and what that could look like, and there's such a range from all private parts covered at all times. Enforcement will focus on positive guidance without embarrassment to the student. Clothing may not, or it gets more explicit about just like not stating, hate speech, whatever. Or something as simple as students' right to respect themselves in the way that they dress. The ambiguity of it, I know what it's trying to do, but I feel like there's still room to continue the old way of addressing girls in student dress code.
And policy committee?
Policy committee. The rub here, and Phyllis, you can help me out, is that if some of these are updates and we have some wiggle room, others are updates that are required concretely in terms of the language. And I read this one, Phyllis, if you help me out here, as required by, are we looking at the second? I think Annie's point is referring to
The
the
Hawkins
second.
law covers hair. I'm talking more about that first line.
Which is just updated language, that's not.
Yeah, that's just updated, where it says
So
a
we
student's
can-
appearance, including dress and hygiene, must not disrupt the educational process or compromise standards of health and safety.
Okay, so you're not talking about.
No, I know that's the law. I'm talking about must not disrupt the educational process, right? Because that argument has been used many, many times, like, well, that's disrupting their ability to focus or whatever. And I just think that there's still a lot of space to have that. Not that I'm saying anyone would, but it still gives that space for it.
Part of that though is the last sentence where it says procedures for guiding student appearance will be developed by the superintendent or designee and be in the student handbook.
Right.
So those things can be more detailed out in that
In the handbook.
And that
And
has
they
to be
are.
developed because
I
this
know,
is
It's a sticky subject
Yeah.
because, defining what disrupts the educational process
Yeah.
is,
That is my worry in this.
and it's hard to anticipate every situation too, so. And I think that's why it's written in sort of a general way, because it's hard to anticipate what all the possible iterations are of student dress.
One lesson that I learned early on from Jim and others is that there's policy and then there's the implementation of the policy, and that's where the handbook comes in. So
Right.
I think it's written intentionally vague so that the district, right, can be more specific.
And so,
And I'm comfortable with that can be.
dress code issues, the concerns don't happen very often at the elementary level. It happens more often at the junior high level. And several years ago, Greg led a team of staff members, and I believe you put students into that as well, to revamp our dress code policy to try to avoid some of the things, the very things that you're talking about. And we implemented those changes, 3-4 years ago, Greg, that was done?
I think Robin actually started it.
Okay, yeah, all right.
Yeah, no,
Yeah,
I
love to
I
send
remember
it
now,
to you.
thank you.
And I'm sure it's beautiful. I have no doubt. I'm just thinking about like top of the line rules of the land, if you will, like reflecting the work that you've already done. That's all I'm talking about.
And I think, the idea of disrupting the educational process, yet also being a little bit more modern in terms of, current day approach with how, student dress and being, I think there was some great pains taken to try to loosen things up a little bit, but without, eliminating the potential for disruptions to the educational environment. So I think it's gone pretty well over the last couple of years. I don't know how often you are dealing with, dress
I
code
can
issues.
speak, we don't have hardly any issues
I would say most of the issues early on were with staff. Not how they dress.
Not how they dress, but how they were.
How they approach it,
how
yeah,
they
and
looked
that's
hard.
what makes me worried, yeah, exactly.
But they had sort of a recentering in that process,
Yeah.
so
There
that
was
staff learned what the expectations were, and so
Yeah.
that was a big part of it.
Yeah, a lot of professional development, a lot of educating kids, a lot of, adults and kids, education, lots of it.
That was pretty.
Pause, perfect.
Move on. Any further? Okay, so next one, 7180, prevention of and response to bullying and intimidation. There we go, yep. Intimidation and harassment. Yep.
I just wanted to ask a question about, in relationship to, aggression or bullying behavior. And this may not be something that we can speak to based on law, but I was curious about, how the policy would affect students whose behaviors are related to, some sort of disability, and how that is actually written into or thought about in relationship to this policy.
Yes, there are some special circumstances and stipulations that go along when students have individualized education plans. Fortunately, here with us tonight is our new director. So yes, there are some different rules that go into effect when students have a disability that might be causing some of those things. Yes, there's like legal limits and stipulations as to how those things are approached.
That was my only question.
I'm happy to elaborate on that if you so wish.
Sure, please.
Just as far as special education or even a student with a 504 plan, any sort of type of disability, if there's any sort of discipline that needs to take place, there's Illinois regulations that tell us how to handle that. So there's a limit on suspension days. There's also something called a manifestation determination review, where we determine as a team whether or not that the discipline actually was a manifestation of the child's disability, and then we make a decision as to what happens next. And it's usually a revision of the IEP or the behavior intervention plan. So yes, there is a distinction for students with disabilities.
Thank you very much.
And I understood this policy to be broadening for the victim of bullying, right? Broadening some of the kinds of things that constitute bullying, and but I appreciate that, the look on it in terms of how behavior could be characterized by someone who isn't, necessarily intentionally engaging in bullying behavior. My understanding of this is that it was broadening up the possibilities. The previous language has been really, really narrow. So.
I just wanted to make sure there was a contingency in there that related to
Yes.
behaviors associated with this.
Absolutely.
Otherwise, I thought.
Thank you. Okay. Policy 7240, conduct code for participants in extracurricular activities. Policy 7250, student support services. Policy 7260, exemption from physical activity. Policy 7290, suicide, depression awareness and prevention. All right, that concludes our first readings of policy this evening. All right. I call for a motion to approve the 2022-23 required annual student fees as follows. Book and material fees at $120, remaining the same. Technology fee at $15, remaining the same. Optional fees include voluntary bus rider fee of $240, voluntary junior high yearbook fee of $22 increase, and a voluntary early childhood preschool tuition of $3,000.
So moved.
Second.
The fee increase for the yearbook is set by the vendor. We have no control over that. It's also just a pass-through fee. Most of the yearbooks are not actually purchased online from the parents. All of the other fees are remaining the same for next year. We didn't see a need for an increase. I will point out the after-school activities fee on page 2. We still do not charge any students to participate in any after-school, before-school activities, whether it's sports, band, choir, chess club, anything like that we put on. And we also continue to provide after-school activity buses for those students as well, and they're not charged for that. So.
And we also do free field trips for all students as well, so.
Yes.
I'm proud to say that this district, I believe, does more in this regard than any other district I've experienced or worked with before.
Only question.
And I talk about preschool. Sorry.
Oh, it's okay. I just wanted to confirm the bus zone, that's not changed. The 1.5 miles, that's the same as what we've had previously.
Correct.
Yes. That was it.
Yeah, it's stipulated on a state code.
But yes, that's.
Just note that we are under 1.5 miles, but our across the street neighbors are over.
Yes, the hazardous crossings can reduce that 1.5 miles offer of the
Oh,
free
true,
bus.
that's true.
So when there's a hazardous crossing, that also qualifies people for free busing. And the police department determines what the hazardous crossings are for.
Okay, Sturban,
Yes.
Sullivan,
Yes.
Warshaw,
Yes.
Bill Jordan,
Yes.
Espinoza.
Yes.
Ruffner.
Yes. Thank you. I call for a motion to approve the board's attorney and the administration's recommendation after a first review to release the minutes for the closed session meetings of the Board of Education as follows. Closed session minutes from the following meetings will be approved for full release February 17th and March 17th, 2022.
So
Sullivan,
Yes.
Warshaw.
Yes.
Bill Jordan,
Yes.
Espinoza.
Yes.
Ruffner.
Yes.
Sturban.
Yes.
I'm curious, are you not the most exciting closed sessions? There was one request and or response for information under the Freedom of Information Act during the period of April 15th through May 13th. On April 10th, 2022, the district received a commercial request from Zoe Yelson of Smart Procure requesting purchase order and vendor information. The response was sent on May 5th, 2022. I now call for a motion to enter closed session to discuss the appointment, employment, compensation, discipline, performance, or dismissal of specific employees of the public body or legal counsel for the public body, including hearing of testimony on a complaint lodged against an employee of the public body or against legal counsel for the public body to determine the case validity. Only one of these is true. Can I say that? Can I just pull up the one?
It sounds very exciting, but
It really is.
So moved.
Second.
Warshaw.
Yes.
Bill Jordan.
Yes.
Espinoza.
Yes.
Ruffner.
Yes.
Sturban. Sullivan.
Yes.
Yes.
We can kill the camera and we can now say goodnight to Una in the room.
good night, everyone.
We've all been